There was a time when Iran and the United States were close allies. After World War II, as old empires faded, Iran's strategic location and oil reserves made it a key partner for America in the Cold War. The US provided Iran with economic and military aid, helping the Shah modernize the country. In return, Iran became a reliable ally in a turbulent region. On the surface, this partnership looked like a model of cooperation. But beneath the official friendship, many Iranians felt uneasy about foreign influence and the growing power of the ruling elite. The relationship was transactional, focused on oil and geopolitics, not the aspirations of ordinary Iranians. Tensions and mistrust quietly grew. Even during this period of apparent harmony, the seeds of future conflict were already being sown. The turning point came in 1953 when Iran's popular Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, nationalized the oil industry. This move angered Britain and alarmed the US, who feared losing access to oil and the spread of communism. The CIA and MI6 launched Operation Ajax, orchestrating a coup to remove Mossadegh. Propaganda, bribery and street chaos toppled the elected leader. The Shah returned to power, backed by the West, and Iran's oil was once again controlled by foreign interests. For Iranians, the coup was a betrayal, a clear sign that America valued oil over democracy. Trust was shattered, and resentment took root. The 1953 coup became a national trauma, fueling decades of suspicion. What seemed like a victory for the West planted the seeds of lasting enmity. The US-Iran relationship would never be the same. With strong backing from the United States, the Shah of Iran launched the White Revolution, a sweeping series of reforms aimed at modernizing the country and transforming it into a global power. The Shah envisioned a new Iran, one that would rival the West in technology, education, and industry. He strengthened diplomatic and economic ties with Western nations, especially the US, inviting foreign investment and expertise into Iran's rapidly changing cities. Lavish royal spending and ambitious modernization projects created an image of dazzling progress. Glittering palaces and luxury cars became symbols of the new era. But beneath this surface, the reality for many Iranians was far more complicated and often harsh. The Shah ruled with an iron fist, relying on the notorious Savak secret police to silence critics and crush any form of dissent. Fear and suspicion spread through society as people learned to watch what they said, even among friends. Political repression, torture, and disappearances became tragically common. Thousands were imprisoned for their beliefs, and many families lived in constant fear of a midnight knock at the door. Many Iranians began to see the Shah as a puppet of the United States, resenting the growing presence of foreign advisors and the influence of Western culture on their traditions and daily lives. Economic inequality soared. While oil wealth poured into the country, it enriched only a small elite. Most Iranians, especially in rural areas, continued to struggle with poverty and lack of opportunity. Religious leaders and the poor felt increasingly alienated by the Shah's aggressive push for westernization. Traditional values were sidelined, and many felt their voices were ignored. The gap between rich and poor widened dramatically, fueling resentment and anger. Discontent simmered in the streets as more and more people questioned the cost of the Shah's vision. Outwardly, the Shah's regime appeared stable and secure, protected by military might and secret police. But beneath the surface, it was built on fear, repression, and growing resentment. By the late 1970s, the stage was set for revolution. Protests erupted across the country, uniting people from all walks of life against the regime. Iran had become a powder keg, tensions mounting, anger boiling over, and the nation teetering on the edge of explosive change. By the late 1970s, anger at the Shah erupted into revolution. Diverse groups, students, merchants, intellectuals, and especially the clergy, united against the regime. Ayatollah Khomeini, exiled but influential, called for an Islamic republic free from foreign control. Protests grew, met with brutal crackdowns that only fueled resistance. In 1979, the Shah fled Iran. Khomeini returned to a hero's welcome. The monarchy collapsed, replaced by the world's first modern Islamic republic. Iran's new leaders severed ties with the West and supported revolutionary causes. For the US, it was a strategic disaster. Its key ally was now a fierce adversary. The revolution marked a dramatic break with the past. The US and Iran were now on a collision course. The world watched as a new era began. Tensions exploded in November 1979 when the US let the exiled Shah enter for medical treatment. Fearing another coup, radical students stormed the US embassy in Tehran, taking 52 Americans hostage. The crisis lasted 444 days, dominating headlines and humiliating the US failed rescue attempts, and nightly images of blindfolded hostages deepened American anger. The US severed diplomatic ties with Iran, a break that endures to this day. For Iranians, the hostage crisis was a symbol of revolutionary victory. For Americans, it was an unforgivable act that cemented Iran's image as an enemy. The rift became permanent. With diplomacy dead, the US and Iran fought through proxies across the Middle East. The Iran-Iraq War saw the US back Saddam Hussein while Iran fought for survival. American support for Iraq deepened Iranian mistrust. In Lebanon, Iran backed Hezbollah. The US supported Israel, turning local conflicts into battlegrounds for their rivalry. The 2003 US invasion of Iraq created new chaos, with Iran expanding its influence among Iraq's Shiite majority. Iranian-backed militias clashed with US forces, fueling more hostility. The region became a chessboard with tragic consequences for millions. Every conflict, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, became another front in the US-Iran struggle. The rivalry destabilized the Middle East, making peace elusive. Proxy wars replaced direct confrontation, but the cost was immense. The cycle of conflict seemed endless. The US accused Iran of sponsoring terrorism, pointing to support for groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. Sanctions and diplomatic pressure aimed to isolate Iran and cripple its economy. The US labeled Iran's Revolutionary Guard a terrorist organization, escalating tensions. Iran saw itself as resisting American imperialism, citing the 1953 coup and US military presence as proof of aggression. Iranian leaders argued their support for regional groups was legitimate defense, not terrorism. Each side viewed its actions as justified, the others as hostile. This mutual suspicion fueled a cycle of accusations and reprisals. The divide grew deeper, making trust and reconciliation nearly impossible. Both nations became locked in a narrative of self-defense. The rivalry became self-perpetuating, with no end in sight. The world watched as hostility hardened into a permanent standoff. In the early 2000s, the world was shaken by revelations about Iran's secret nuclear program. Satellite images and intelligence reports suggested that Iran was enriching uranium in hidden facilities, raising fears across the globe. The United States and its allies grew increasingly alarmed, suspecting that Iran's ambitions went beyond peaceful energy and toward building a nuclear weapon. In response, they imposed crippling economic sanctions, targeting Iran's vital oil exports and banking sector, while also launching covert cyber attacks to slow Iran's progress. After years of mounting tension and secret negotiations, a breakthrough finally came in 2015. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, was signed, placing strict limits on Iran's nuclear activities in exchange for relief from international sanctions. The deal was celebrated as a major diplomatic achievement, hailed by many as a step toward peace and stability in the Middle East. Yet, critics in the US and elsewhere argued it didn't go far enough, claiming Iran could still find ways to cheat or wait out the restrictions. In 2018, President Donald Trump announced the US would withdraw from the agreement, calling it the worst deal ever. The US reimposed harsh sanctions, aiming to pressure Iran back to the negotiating table. Iran, feeling betrayed and cornered, began to break the deal's limits, resuming uranium enrichment and restricting international inspections. The nuclear crisis was reignited, and trust between the two sides evaporated. Hopes for a peaceful resolution faded as both sides escalated their rhetoric and actions. Protests erupted in both countries, and diplomatic channels grew colder. The collapse of the deal brought the US and Iran dangerously close to open conflict, with military forces on high alert and tensions running high in the Persian Gulf. The nuclear issue became yet another flashpoint in the long-standing rivalry between the two nations, fueling fears of a broader regional war. As diplomacy unraveled, mistrust deepened, and the possibility of future negotiations seemed more remote than ever. The world watched anxiously, facing a renewed threat of confrontation and instability in the region. The cycle of escalation continued, leaving the future of diplomacy and peace uncertain. In October 2023, Hamas launched a surprise attack on Israel, igniting a devastating war in Gaza that would send shockwaves far beyond its borders. The world watched as the conflict quickly escalated, with scenes of destruction and loss dominating headlines and social media feeds. The United States moved swiftly to support Israel, deploying military aid and diplomatic backing. Meanwhile, Iran's open support for Hamas and other militant groups fueled accusations that Tehran was orchestrating chaos across the region, deepening mistrust and suspicion on all sides. Iranian-backed forces in Lebanon and Yemen, including Hezbollah and the Houthis, launched attacks on Israeli and US targets, turning the conflict into a regional flashpoint. The violence spread, threatening to draw in even more countries. What had long been a shadow war of covert operations and proxy battles now erupted into open confrontation. Assassinations, missile strikes, and sabotage crossed old red lines, making the conflict more unpredictable and dangerous. In 2024, for the first time in history, Iran launched missiles directly at Israel, shattering decades of uneasy deterrence. Israel responded with airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, raising fears of a broader war that could engulf the entire Middle East. The region teetered on the brink of all-out war. Soldiers stood on high alert, tanks rolled through the desert, and civilians fled their homes, desperate to escape the violence. US-Iran relations hit their lowest point since the 1979 revolution, with both sides trading threats and accusations. Diplomatic channels narrowed, and the risk of miscalculation grew with every passing day. The war in Gaza shattered any remaining hopes for reviving the Iran nuclear deal. Negotiations stalled, and international diplomats looked on in frustration as the possibility of peaceful resolution slipped away. Old grievances, memories of the 1953 coup, the 1979 revolution, and the US embassy hostage crisis, mixed with new violence, fueling a cycle of resentment and retaliation. Both sides saw themselves as defending against aggression, locked in a struggle shaped by history, ideology, and fear of the unknown. Diplomacy seemed impossible as the risk of a wider war grew. The world held its breath, hoping for a breakthrough that never came. The journey from friendship to enmity had reached a perilous climax, leaving the future of the region and the world hanging in the balance.